"You're clearly paranoid and unstable," Dennis Caldwell said, leaning back in his leather chair, with that same condescending smile I'd seen him use on vendors who questioned his invoices. "Nobody will believe a word you say." I stood in his corner office in Denver, Colorado, holding a manila folder that contained enough evidence to end his career. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk, and I could hear the distant hum of our accounting department wrapping up another day at Gravora Group, the mid-sized manufacturing company where I'd spent the last 12 years of my life. "Dennis, the numbers don't lie," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The pension fund is missing $200,000, and every withdrawal traces back to your authorization codes." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Monica, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you should take some time off, get your head straight." The patronizing tone made my jaw clench. I was 46 years old, had managed payroll and employee benefits with zero discrepancies for over a decade, and he was treating me like an hysterical child. But something in his eyes told me this conversation was about to take a very different turn than I'd hoped. "I've triple-checked everything," I continued, opening the folder to show him the printed spreadsheets. The quarterly audit flagged these transactions, and when I dug deeper— "When you what?" Dennis stood abruptly, his face flushing red. "You went digging through confidential financial records without authorization? That's a serious violation of company policy, Monica." My heart started racing, but not from fear, from anger. This man had been stealing from our employees' retirement funds, money that belonged to people like Janet in shipping, who was 3 years from retirement, or Carlos in maintenance, who'd been faithfully contributing for 8 years. And he had the audacity to turn this around on me. "Those records are part of my job responsibilities," I said, keeping my voice level. "Managing the pension fund distributions falls under—" "Not anymore, it doesn't." Dennis picked up his phone. "Security? Yes, I need an escort to human resources. We have a terminated employee who needs to be walked out immediately." The word "terminated" hit me like a physical blow. In all my years at Gravora Group, I'd never even received a written warning. My performance reviews were consistently excellent. I'd caught a major payroll error 2 years ago that saved the company $50,000. And now, because I'd discovered his theft, I was being fired. But as I watched Dennis hang up the phone with a satisfied smirk, I realized something important. He'd just made a catastrophic mistake. 20 minutes later, I was clearing out my desk, while a stone-faced security guard watched my every move. The entire accounting department had gone silent, their eyes following me as I packed 12 years of my professional life into a cardboard box. Dennis had announced to everyone that I was being let go for performance issues and violation of confidentiality protocols, painting me as an untrustworthy employee who'd overstepped her bounds. I could see the confusion in my colleagues' faces. Jennifer, my closest work friend, kept glancing between me and Dennis's office with obvious bewilderment. We'd had lunch together just yesterday, and I'd seemed perfectly fine. Janet from shipping even walked over to ask if I needed anything, her weathered hands patting my shoulder gently. "I'm okay," I told her softly, though my hands were shaking slightly as I packed my personal items. "Just take care of yourself, Janet. Make sure you keep track of your pension statements, all right?" She nodded, not understanding the deeper meaning behind my words, but something in my tone made her promise she would. What Dennis didn't know, what nobody in that office knew, was that I'd been preparing for this possibility since the moment I'd first spotted the discrepancies 3 weeks ago. My background wasn't just in accounting. I'd spent 5 years volunteering with the Colorado Financial Ethics Advisory Board, helping small businesses implement proper oversight procedures. Through that work, I developed relationships with forensic accountants and federal regulators who specialized in pension fraud cases. More importantly, I'd learned to think like an investigator. The manila folder Dennis had dismissed so confidently was just a fraction of what I'd uncovered. The real evidence was stored on an encrypted drive that I'd been building methodically for weeks. Every suspicious transaction, every forged authorization, every attempt to cover his tracks. It was all documented, cross-referenced, and backed up in multiple secure locations. As I walked toward the elevator with my box of belongings, Dennis emerged from his office, probably wanting to make sure I actually left the building. He caught my eye and gave me that same condescending smile. "Monica," he called out, loud enough for half the office to hear. "I hope you understand this is for the best. Sometimes people just aren't cut out for positions of responsibility." I stopped walking and turned to face him. Every eye in the department was on us now, and I could feel the weight of their attention. For a moment, I considered telling everyone exactly what kind of man they were working for. But I had a better plan. "You're absolutely right, Dennis," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Sometimes people really aren't cut out for positions of responsibility. Sure, just wait." The confusion that flickered across his face was deeply satisfying. That evening, I sat in my home office in my modest ranch house on the outskirts of Denver, staring at the cardboard box from my old job while I made the most important phone call of my professional life. The encrypted drive sat next to my laptop, containing enough evidence to potentially send Dennis to federal prison. "Patricia, it's Monica Delgado," I said when the forensic accountant answered. Patricia Wong and I had worked together on 3 different cases during my time with the Ethics Board, and I trusted her expertise implicitly. "I need to discuss a pension fraud case that's going to require federal involvement." "How bad are we talking?" Patricia's voice was all business, which I appreciated. $200,000 stolen from employee retirement funds over the past 18 months, possibly more, I said, pulling up the detailed spreadsheets on my laptop screen. The perpetrator is the chief financial officer of a mid-sized manufacturing company, and he terminated my employment today when I confronted him about it. The silence on the other end told me Patricia understood the gravity of the situation. "Monica, you know I have to ask. Are you absolutely certain about these numbers?" "I've checked them 7 different ways," I replied, scrolling through the evidence I'd compiled. "The transaction patterns are clear, the authorization codes are forged, and I have documentation showing he created false vendor accounts to funnel the money through. This isn't a mistake or an oversight. This is deliberate, systematic theft." Patricia's sigh was audible through the phone. "Send me everything you have. Encrypted, obviously. And Monica, don't talk to anyone else about this until we've had a chance to review the evidence. If this is as clear-cut as you're describing, we're going to need to bring in the Department of Labor's investigative division." After I hung up with Patricia, I made my second call to Thomas Rodriguez, a Department of Labor investigator I'd met during a workshop on pension security 3 years earlier. Thomas specialized in cases involving retirement fund misappropriation, and he'd given me his direct number with instructions to call if I ever encountered anything suspicious. "Thomas, this is Monica Delgado from the Colorado Ethics Board," I said when he answered. "I need to report a significant pension fraud case, and I believe it falls under federal jurisdiction." "Tell me what you've got, Monica." As I explained the situation, I could hear Thomas taking notes. When I mentioned the dollar amount and the systematic nature of the theft, his questions became more pointed and urgent. "Monica, I need you to understand something," Thomas said after I'd finished my summary. "If what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just embezzlement. This is a federal crime that affects the retirement security of dozens of working families. The FBI is going to want to move quickly on this." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Dennis thought he could intimidate me into silence, thought my word wouldn't carry weight against his position of authority. He had no idea that I'd already set wheels in motion that he couldn't stop. "I understand completely," I told Thomas. "When do we start?" 3 days after my termination, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at the Denver field office of the Department of Labor, watching Patricia Wong walk 2 federal investigators through the financial evidence I'd compiled. Special Agent Rebecca Foster from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division sat across from me, her sharp eyes focused on the spreadsheets covering the conference table like a general studying battle plans. "This is exceptional documentation, Monica," Agent Foster said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people take notice. "Most pension fraud cases take months to build this level of evidence. How long were you tracking these discrepancies?" "About 3 weeks from start to finish," I replied, feeling oddly calm despite the surreal nature of the situation. Once I identified the pattern, it was just a matter of following the electronic trail. Dennis wasn't particularly sophisticated in covering his tracks. He seemed to think his position would protect him from scrutiny. Thomas Rodriguez, the Department of Labor investigator I'd contacted, leaned forward with interest. "What made you start looking in the first place?" "Our quarterly audit flagged some unusual withdrawal patterns," I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd created. The amounts weren't enormous individually, usually between $8,000 and $15,000. But the frequency was wrong. Pension fund distributions should follow predictable patterns based on employee retirement schedules and emergency hardship applications. These transactions didn't match any of our documented employee requests. Agent Foster exchanged a look with her partner, Agent David Chen. "And when you confronted your supervisor about these discrepancies?" "He terminated my employment within 24 hours, I said, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. "Claimed I was paranoid and unstable, said nobody would believe me. Then he had security escort me out for alleged performance issues and confidentiality violations." "Classic intimidation tactic," Agent Chen observed, making notes in his file. "Discredit the whistleblower to undermine their credibility. Unfortunately for Mr. Caldwell, he doesn't understand how federal investigations work." Patricia looked up from the financial documents she'd been reviewing. "Monica, I need to ask about your access to these records. Were you authorized to conduct this level of financial investigation?" "Absolutely," I said firmly. "Managing pension fund distributions was part of my core job responsibilities. I had full administrative access to the retirement account systems, and conducting quarterly audits was literally in my job description." Dennis tried to frame it as unauthorized access, but every search and every download was within my legitimate work scope. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. "That's crucial for the integrity of the evidence. And you said you have documentation showing false vendor accounts?" I pulled out another folder from my briefcase. "Dennis created 4 different shell companies with similar names to legitimate vendors we work with regularly. Goldthorn Manufacturing became Goldthorn Industries. Nexora Labs became Nexora Solutions. He was counting on the similarity to avoid detection during routine payment processing." "How much money total?" Agent Chen asked. "From what I could trace, approximately $230,000 over 18 months, I said. "But I suspect it goes back further. Dennis has been the CFO for 3 years, and I only had access to review records going back 2 years due to our document retention policies." Agent Foster stood and walked to the window, her expression thoughtful. "Monica, I want you to understand that once we move forward with this investigation, Dennis Caldwell is going to know exactly who provided the evidence against him. Are you prepared for the possibility of retaliation?" I thought about Janet from shipping, counting on her pension for retirement in 3 years. I thought about Carlos in maintenance, faithfully contributing to a fund that Dennis was treating like his personal bank account. I thought about all the employees at Gravora Group who trusted that their futures were secure. "Agent Foster," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Dennis Caldwell already fired me for doing my job. What more can he do to me?" 1 week later, I was consulting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit when my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. It was from Jennifer, my former colleague in the accounting department. "Monica, Dennis is telling everyone you stole money and they fired you for embezzlement. He's saying you created false documents to frame him. Some people are starting to believe it." Agent Foster noticed my expression change immediately. "What is it?" I showed her the message, watching her jaw tighten as she read. "He's trying to flip the narrative," she said grimly. "Classic deflection strategy. Accuse the accuser before they can gather support." "Can he do that?" I asked, feeling a surge of panic. Can he just lie about what happened and make people believe it? He can try, Agent Foster replied. But he's making another critical mistake. Every false statement he makes about you or this case is additional evidence of his consciousness of guilt. We're going to document everything. Over the next few days, the situation at Gravora Group deteriorated rapidly. Jennifer kept me updated through careful text messages, describing how Dennis had called an all-hands meeting to address rumors and misinformation about the company's financial management. He'd painted me as a disgruntled employee who'd fabricated evidence after being rightfully terminated for poor performance. But Dennis had underestimated something crucial: my reputation among my former colleagues. Most people aren't buying it, Jennifer texted me on Thursday evening. Janet from shipping asked pointed questions about the pension fund during the meeting. Carlos from maintenance said he wants to review his account statements. People remember how careful and honest you've always been. The real turning point came when Dennis made his most serious error yet. According to Jennifer, he'd announced that the company would be switching to a new pension fund management system to prevent unauthorized access to employee accounts. He was essentially admitting that unauthorized access had occurred while simultaneously claiming I was the one responsible for it. He's trying to plug holes in a dam that's already breaking, Agent Foster explained when I shared this information. The new system announcement is evidence that he knows there are vulnerabilities in the current system, vulnerabilities he created to facilitate his theft. Patricia Wong had been working around the clock to verify every transaction I'd identified, and her preliminary findings were even more damaging than we'd initially suspected. Monica. He wasn't just stealing pension contributions, she told me during a conference call with the federal team. He was also skimming from the company's matching contributions. The total theft is approaching $300,000. That changes the federal sentencing guidelines significantly, Agent Chen noted. We're now looking at potential charges under multiple statutes, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. But the most shocking discovery came when Patricia traced the money Dennis had stolen. Instead of finding evidence of gambling debts or personal financial problems, she uncovered something much more calculated. He wasn't spending this money on lifestyle expenses, Patricia explained, showing us bank records the FBI had obtained through court orders. He was investing it: stock purchases, cryptocurrency, real estate speculation. He was treating the pension fund like his personal investment portfolio. The cold calculation of it made my stomach turn. This wasn't desperation or addiction. It was pure greed. Dennis had systematically stolen from hardworking employees because he thought he could generate higher returns than the pension fund's conservative investment strategy. Agent Foster, I said, looking at the evidence spread across the conference table. When are you planning to move on this? She checked her watch. The warrants are being finalized now. We'll execute them tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., right when Dennis arrives at the office. I felt a dark satisfaction building in my chest. In less than 12 hours, Dennis Caldwell was about to have the worst day of his professional life. The morning of the raid, I wasn't at Gravora Group, but I didn't need to be. Agent Foster had arranged for me to monitor the operation from the FBI field office, where I could watch through live video feeds from the agent's body cameras and provide real-time guidance about the company's financial systems and document locations. At exactly 9 a.m., I watched on multiple screens as 12 federal agents in dark suits walked through the main entrance of Gravora Group. The receptionist's shocked expression was clearly visible as Agent Foster presented the sealed warrant to search the premises and seize financial records. "Where is Dennis Caldwell's office?" Agent Foster asked the receptionist, who pointed toward the corner office with a trembling hand. Through Agent Chen's body camera, I watched them approach Dennis's office. He was just settling in with his morning coffee, probably planning another day of covering up his crimes and spreading lies about me. When he looked up and saw the federal agents, his face went from confusion to recognition to absolute terror in the span of about 3 seconds. "Dennis Caldwell?" Agent Foster's voice was calm and professional. "I'm Special Agent Foster with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an investigation into pension fund fraud. Dennis's coffee cup slipped from his hands, splashing across his mahogany desk and soaking the same financial reports he'd been reviewing when I confronted him 2 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. "There must be some mistake," Dennis stammered, his voice higher than usual. "I don't know anything about pension fund fraud. This is about Monica Delgado, isn't it? I told you she was unstable. She fabricated evidence to get revenge after we fired her." Agent Chen stepped forward with the warrant paperwork. "Mr. Caldwell, you have the right to remain silent, but we need you to step away from your computer and allow our forensic team to secure your electronic devices." Through the video feed, I watched Dennis's face cycle through emotions I'd never seen from him before. Panic, desperate calculation, and finally, defeated recognition that his carefully constructed lies were collapsing around him. The search of his office revealed even more evidence than we'd expected. In addition to seizing his computer and financial files, the agents found handwritten notes detailing his shell company scheme, including passwords and account numbers he'd apparently been too arrogant to properly hide. But the moment that satisfied me most came when Agent Foster asked Dennis about the missing pension funds directly. "Mr. Caldwell, can you explain why employee pension contributions totaling approximately $300,000 were transferred to accounts under your control?" Dennis's response was exactly what I'd expected from him. "That's impossible. The pension fund is completely secure. Monica Delgado had unauthorized access to those systems, and she must have manipulated the records to make it look like I was involved." Agent Foster's expression didn't change, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice when she replied, "Mr. Caldwell, we have independent forensic confirmation of these transactions from the bank's own records. We also have documentation showing that you personally authorized each transfer using your administrative credentials. These aren't manipulated files. They're federal banking records." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the camera feed, I could see Dennis realizing that his lies were useless against documented federal evidence. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely small. As the agents continued their search, word spread throughout the office. I could see employees gathering in confused clusters, whispering among themselves as they watched federal agents systematically dismantling Dennis's world. Janet from shipping stood near the elevator, her face a mixture of shock and growing understanding. The man who'd called me paranoid and unstable was now being read his rights by the FBI while his office was searched for evidence of federal crimes. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching Dennis Caldwell face the consequences of his actions. The courtroom was packed with Gravora Group employees, many of whom had taken time off work to witness their former CFO's sentencing hearing. Dennis looked nothing like the confident, condescending man who'd fired me. His expensive suits had been replaced by a basic gray outfit. His face was gaunt, and his hands shook slightly as he stood before Judge Margaret Harrison. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of theft, totaling over $400,000, far more than even I had initially suspected. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you systematically stole from the retirement accounts of dozens of hardworking employees over a period of nearly 3 years. You violated the trust placed in you as a fiduciary, and when confronted with evidence of your crimes, you attempted to destroy the reputation and livelihood of the person who uncovered your theft." I watched Dennis's face as the judge continued, feeling a cold satisfaction as each word landed like a physical blow. "Your actions demonstrate a calculated disregard for the financial security of others, and a willingness to victimize those who depend on their pension benefits for basic survival. The court sentences you to 42 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the affected pension fund, plus penalties and interest." As the bailiff led Dennis away in handcuffs, he turned one last time to scan the courtroom. His eyes found mine across the packed gallery, and I saw the moment he truly understood what had happened to him. The paranoid, unstable woman he'd dismissed had systematically documented his crimes and delivered him to federal justice. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met his gaze with the same steady calm I'd shown in his office that day and watched him disappear through the courthouse doors. The aftermath of Dennis's conviction brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Within a week of his sentencing, I received a call from the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, offering me a position as a senior investigator specializing in pension fraud cases. "Monica, your work on the Caldwell case was exceptional," explained Director Sarah Matthews during our phone interview. "We need investigators who understand both the technical aspects of financial crimes and the human impact of retirement security theft. Would you be interested in making this kind of work your full-time career?" The irony was profound. Dennis had fired me for doing my job too well, and now the federal government wanted to hire me for exactly the same skills he'd tried to silence. I accepted the position immediately. My first case as a federal investigator involved a construction company in Colorado Springs, where the owner had been diverting pension contributions to fund personal real estate investments. The pattern was remarkably similar to Dennis's crimes, but this time I approached it with federal authority and resources. Meanwhile, Gravora Group had implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future pension fraud. The new CFO, brought in from outside the company, established multiple oversight layers and mandatory auditing procedures. Janet from shipping approached me at Dennis's sentencing to thank me personally. "You saved my retirement," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I was 3 years away from retiring, and if he'd kept stealing, I don't know what I would have done." That conversation made everything worthwhile. The stress, the confrontation, the temporary unemployment, even Dennis's attempts to destroy my reputation. Every challenge I'd faced had led to this moment, protecting working families from financial predators. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I realized Dennis had been right about one thing. Nobody would believe his word, not anymore, and not against federal evidence. As I settled into my new role as a federal investigator, I often reflected on the twisted path that had led me here, knowing that Dennis's attempt to silence me had only amplified my voice in ways he never could have imagined.